Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or so to let others join, and then we'll get started. So if you could hang tight for just a couple of minutes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us this morning for our third advisory board meeting of the year. And it was really great to see a lot of y'all in February in person here in Raleigh. And since then, I know our team has been working with many of y'all on some of our different events. And we're excited to share some updates today with you all, and then also talk through and get some feedback on a couple of the projects that we have been working on in collaboration with you. So we've got a pretty packed agenda today that we will move through quickly. But before we jump into the content, I did want to take a moment to introduce you all to our new secretary for the Department of Public Safety. So I believe earlier this year, I let y'all know that we had a change in leadership, and Jeffrey Smythe was appointed as secretary for the Department of Public Safety, and he is able to join us this morning. And so I just wanted to give a few moments for Mr. Secretary to say a few remarks to our board. Secretary Smythe, are you on the call?
I am. Good morning, everyone.
Awesome. Good morning.
Thank you for having me for a few minutes to greet you all and thank you all. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. As Sarah said, I'm new, right, in air quotes. I started back in January, so I'm 5.5 months new. Working diligently with staff here to get introduced over at the legislature and become impactful in the processes of gaining funding for the work that you all do for all of DPS. I'll share, for those of you who might not know my background, I spent 35 years in policing, 27 years in Arizona, 8 years here as the police chief in Burlington. I spent about 4.5 years at CJ Standards, and now I'm here at DPS. So in my travels in policing in Arizona, and then certainly in Burlington, I landed in Burlington as the police chief in 2013, and we had a crime problem. Burlington during my tenure regularly saw about 8 homicides, 6 to 8 homicides. And for a relatively small, not extremely urban town, that's a pretty significant number of violent crimes. And so we explored a variety of solutions. And I don't know that we plugged in with DPS, but I think that the evolution of the work that you all are doing is very important. And if I were still police chief there, I would want to be working regularly with this group, right? And so I share that perspective just to say that I've got your back. That whatever the initiatives of this group are, whatever you bring forward as evidence-based solutions, I'm going to support that work. I'm going to champion that work and carry your message forward to the governor and carry your message forward to the legislature and work with the solutions that we bring forward so that we can reduce the level of victimization across North Carolina, reduce the level of violence, and make sure that North Carolinians are safer. So I know you all have the heart for this work. You're actively doing it, and just wanted to express my support. If you got a minute, I'm happy to answer a question or two, or if that's too time consuming, duck off, whatever you think is best time wise, but happy to be here to be supportive.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, we certainly have a minute or so if anybody has any questions or would like to say anything to the Secretary. You can feel free to unmute. Okay. Well, hearing
Thank you for the
none.
time. I appreciate it. I wish I could stay all morning for your meeting. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do that, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think you've got a big conference coming up maybe in November, and we'll probably make sure that I get that on my calendar. If there are other opportunities for me to plug in person or to support you virtually, please just let me know, and I'll do my very best to engage with this group as you do your important work. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you, Secretary Smythe.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your work.
Thank you. Okay, well, moving forward in the agenda, next we wanted to share some updates with you all about a lot of things that we've been working on over the past several months since we saw you back in February. So, um, thanks, Callie. Starting out, we wanted to update everyone and have you all welcome our summer interns who will be working with us over the next 3 months here through our DPS summer internship program. So we will be having Rose, who is coming to us from North Carolina State University, and she's a Master of Social Work student. And then we have Emma, who's coming from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's a Master of Public Health student. So we're really excited to have them this summer and have some extra hands on board to help us with all the different projects that we have going on. And you all will be seeing a lot of them. They'll be at our regional meetings this summer. They'll be helping out with some projects, probably emailing you all some things. So just, you know, when you see them, if you could give them a warm welcome and make them feel a part of the team. All right. And then next update that Secretary Smythe already alluded to, and hopefully you all have seen this announcement through our emails to you and through our newsletter, but we officially have a date for this year's conference. So the conference will be held in November on the 17th and 18th back in Raleigh again, but at a different location at the Marriott Crabtree here in Raleigh. So please mark your calendars. And I know there are several of you working with us on planning this event through the conference planning committee, which we really appreciate. And we also just recently opened a call for proposals for those interested in presenting during the breakout sessions during the conference. And so we will put that link in the chat again for you all, for any of you who may be interested, but also please share it with your networks, with your teams, and with your ecosystems in your community, because we really hope to get a diverse representation of proposals so that we can have some great content for the folks at the conference. And we also, in that same newsletter, released a call for sponsors for the conference. I believe we mentioned at a previous meeting that we do already have one sponsor for the conference, which is our colleagues at the Department of Health and Human Services in the Injury and Violence Prevention branch are a sponsor for the conference. And so that is exciting and is helping us to move forward on planning, particularly around some of our networking events. but we're always, the more sponsorships that we get, just the better that we can kind of enhance the conference for others. And so we've got that call for sponsors also in the newsletter. Beth, you have a question?
Yes, and I had to figure out how to unmute, but I figured it out. Are there different, what are the different levels of sponsorship? Is that in the, I didn't see, I think I might have missed that in the newsletter.
Yes, that is a great question, and you really have put me on the spot. We do have different levels, and I don't know them off the top of my
Okay.
head, but they are in the sponsorship packet. So we'll make sure that Callie or Desiree will email you that packet right now,
Great.
so that you can see that. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Awesome. Well, like I said, please mark your calendars and we'll be sharing more information very soon about the conference. And also, just an FYI, our anticipated time frame for opening registration is August. So look out for more updates about that. Okay, next slide, please. So you should have also been receiving emails from us over the past couple or several weeks about our community violence prevention regional meetings. And so all of the registrations have opened for each region, the middle, west, and east. And the middle region meeting will be held next week, actually, in Greensboro, in partnership with the Department of Community Safety and our advisory board, Letitia and her team. And then our West Region meeting will be held on June 30th in Charlotte in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Office of Violence Prevention and a number of our advisory board members from in that area. And then our East Region meeting will be held in Fayetteville on July 15th in partnership with the Fayetteville Office of Community Safety and a host of other members out of advisory board members out there in the East Region. So thank you to everyone who's participated on those planning committees and have helped us get this far in putting these dates, getting venues, putting the content together. And the registration for the middle region is closed, hence the meeting coming up next week. However, registration for the west and the east are still open, and they'll be open until June 5th. So for those interested in attending or for those who want to share with your networks, your teams, etc., please distribute that registration link out to your networks and encourage folks to register by the deadline, please. And also, just to FYI, because of our partnerships that I mentioned for each of these regions, all of these events will be able to be hosted free of charge. So are there any questions about the regional meetings before we move forward? No? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so back in March and in our March newsletter, hopefully you all saw that we announced the release of our TA request form. So this was officially launched on our website as a way for our office to essentially streamline our TA process. And so if you go on the website, and we'll make sure that link gets in the chat, you'll see we have kind of a brief description of what TA from our office looks like, and then a list of different categories of ways that we're able to support and provide TA, and then a form for folks to submit a formal request. And so obviously we're still taking requests by people reaching out or giving us a call, but we just have this form to try to help, one, make it more clear and direct of what we can, how we can support and what type of services we provide. But then, like I said, to just make it a more streamlined and organized process on our end. So if you haven't taken a look, please take a look and also share this with your networks. And I also want to give a big shout out to Desiree on our who helped us pull this all together and spent countless hours getting this form up and going on the website. So thank you, Desiree. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. And so since we last saw you all, we've had two webinars. one in February and then another one in April. In February, that one was on how public policy impacts violence prevention initiatives. And then last month's webinar was around addressing the impacts of violence and how and highlighting some different programs in our state that are providing long-term support to victims and survivors of gun violence. And so both of those webinars are now on our DPS YouTube page, and you can find them linked through our office's website. So if you weren't able to attend these webinars, I would definitely encourage you to take a look. They were both really great webinars, and all of the presenters shared some really insightful information. Next slide. Okay, another update for you all. We've had a lot going on since February. And I know at our February meeting, we had originally introduced this ROCA training, the ROCA Rewire CBT training that we were going to be partnering with ROCA International to host. And we did host that training last week here in Raleigh. And we had 22 participants show up from across the state, and including some folks from our advisory board or from organizations represented on our advisory board. And overall, throughout the 2 days, folks were walked through that Rewire CBT model and how to apply this model in their direct service work to help de-escalate and provide better support to the participants that they work with in their programs. And so it was a great 2 days, and we got a lot of good feedback, and we'll be working with the folks that went through this training over the next few months to evaluate their experience in there, and also how they're able to utilize and apply the tools that they learned in their day-to-day work. And so we're looking forward to getting some better insights on that to be able to better share how this model can potentially be leveraged by programs across our state. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so if you recall, also in our February meeting, we had a conversation about how our office was looking to start doing some regional prioritization, starting with digging in and having a bit more focus on our rural parts of the state. And so we had a conversation with you all and collected some information, which was really helpful. And our team is actually still going through all of that information and synthesizing that. But we wanted to just update you all that this is still an ongoing project and priority for us. And we'll be having our interns this summer work on some literature reviews to kind of help inform this prioritization and look into strategies here and across the country that have been shown to be successful for rural communities, so that we can use that to inform some of this prioritization. And so we hope in our next couple of meetings to be able to share some updates on that with you all. Next slide. Okay, so we know that coming up in June is kind of the start of a busy period in the community violence prevention and intervention space, with both National Gun Violence Awareness Month happening throughout the month of June, and then also with the summertime typically being a very active time for community violence. And so a lot of programs typically ramp up their programming and outreach and engagement. And so with that, we would love to know of events and things that you all have going on with your program, so that we can, one, just share and raise awareness about them, but also to come out and support as many as we can. And so if you do have an event going on for Gun Violence Awareness Month or throughout the summer, please let us know. You can send an email to anyone on our team or to the OVP inbox, and we will try to get these things, one, like I said, shared out broadly, but then also on our calendars as well. And then same with, even if you're not hosting an event per se, but if there are any particular resources or strategies that you all are leveraging for the summertime to try to get ahead of potential spikes in violence, we'd love to hear about that as well, to, again, just distribute that information to your colleagues across the state to help folks as they're strategizing about how to keep their communities safe this summer. So feel free, like I said, to reach out to anybody on our team and share that information. All right, next slide. Okay. And so in our last newsletter a couple of weeks ago, we also shared that in Governor Stein recently released budget recommendations, there were several recommendations pointing towards investment in violence prevention efforts across our state. And so we just wanted to highlight those for you all. Because for one, I know that many of you have been working over the past several years, even before our office was established, to try to get this type of funding and support for this type of work across our state. And so just want to make sure that y'all are aware of what is in his budget, and then also can use that to continue to do your work, to talk to your local representatives and move these initiatives forward. So in the budget, there is not only funds for our office and helping to kind of support the infrastructure for our office, but there is also a recommendation to provide funding for a violence prevention grant program that would be administered through the Governor's Crime Commission, to help kind of offset some of those pitfalls that have happened over the past year or so with declining federal funds. And then also a recommendation for $1 million in support to NC Safe, administered through our folks at Juvenile Justice. So again, these are in the governor's budget recommendations, which I believe we're going to drop that link in the chat, but you can also find this online. But we just wanted to make sure that y'all are aware, because this is encouraging. All right, next slide. Okay, and I believe this is our last update. I told you we've had a lot going on over the past few months, but our last update that we did want to share is for some of you who are very ahead and on top of your schedules, you may have noticed when I shared the dates for the regional meeting schedule that one of those dates, the one for our East Region meeting, conflicts with our next advisory board meeting. And so because of that, we want to go ahead and move that meeting so that we don't have that conflict and folks that are on our advisory board in that region have the opportunity to attend and be present at that event. And so we're going to move our next meeting from July to August. So our next meeting will be August 26th during the same time, 10 to 12. So we will send an updated calendar invite to everyone, so that you, one, know that that July meeting won't be happening anymore, but then have the new date as well. Okay, well, those are all of our updates. So before we move on to the next section of our agenda, I want to pause to see if there are any questions. Let me check the chat as well. Okay. Well, seeing and hearing no questions, we're going to move forward. So I'm going to pass it to Callie to update you all on our core competencies that we first started discussing at our February advisory board meeting, and since then have made a lot of progress on, and hope to share that and get some feedback from you all on that today.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I just wanted to spend the next bit of time sharing updates about the process that we've gone through since February, and then give you all the chance to review the current draft that we have, and then get feedback from you all on what you think about these core competencies. Hopefully, most of you are familiar with the purpose and background of the core competencies, since we spent a bit of time during our February meeting discussing this. But outlined in our strategic plan is a commitment to establish a shared set of core competencies for professionals who are leading or implementing efforts to reduce violence in North Carolina. And the audience for these competencies will be practitioners working in all roles to address community violence, including those who are working directly in violence reduction or those whose roles intersect with or indirectly support violence reduction efforts. And the expectation is that these competencies could be adapted for specific roles, but would generally serve as a foundation for the essential skills, knowledge, and expertise that's needed to work in this space. One of our goals for establishing these competencies is really to strengthen the coordination of our ecosystem statewide, and to also emphasize a much needed investment in professional development for this workforce. Hopefully you all remember seeing this development plan. The last time you saw this, we were on step 2, which was the Community Violence Advisory Board discussion session. So we've made a lot of progress, like Ciara said, since then, which has been exciting. But during our February meeting with you all, we captured initial feedback on what you all thought should be incorporated into a set of community violence reduction core competencies, just based on the unique knowledge and skills that are required for your own roles. So we collected a huge brain dump of ideas during those discussions. And since then, after that, our team internally synthesized all of that information, along with the research that we had collected during our literature review before that discussion session. And from there, we created a working first draft of core competencies. And we wanted to collect additional external feedback on that first draft. So we conducted an external feedback session back at the end of April. And this feedback session was with professionals who are working in the violence reduction space across the state. And overall, we got really positive feedback from the group on the competencies. Most of the constructive feedback that we received really just reflected suggestions to make some of the competencies stronger, to use more plain language. And there were 1 or 2 things that people felt like were missing. So we refined that draft based on that feedback, and we wanted to do one final review with you all today before we move into an internal review and then finalize the core competency list to be released this summer. So today's discussion is primarily geared to give you all the chance to review the second draft, and for us to collect feedback on a few areas that we wanted additional perspectives on. So I'm going to initially do a brief high-level overview of the list just to show you all what the structure of the competencies are like and get you familiar with some of the language that we've used throughout. But then afterwards, I'll spend time walking through all the competencies individually. And I'd specifically like feedback on whether the competencies are applicable across different sectors and roles. And we also want to make sure that the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we've outlined within each competency are clearly defined and understandable. And then after that, during our last bit of time, you'll all have the chance to rank the order of the themes that the competencies are categorized under, because we wanted feedback on how these competencies should be ordered in our final list when we release them. So I'm going to switch my screen if I can get out of this. Okay. So this is the document with all the core competencies. You all should have received this by email this morning. So feel free to get that pulled up during our discussion if it helps to have as a reference. But just to quickly give some background on the structure of the competencies before we do a deep dive, we've organized the list so that the competencies are categorized under specific themes. So the structure starts with the theme, which is generally the larger concept or domain that everything under it is associated with or related to. And then it moves to definition, which is the larger umbrella that all the competencies fall under. And then the competencies themselves are essentially the metrics to meet or achieve the definition. Throughout the competencies, you might notice that we also lean more towards using the term violence reduction instead of violence prevention or violence prevention and intervention. And the purpose of this was just to make sure that we're capturing all professionals who are working to implement different types of strategies across the levels of prevention and intervention, whether that's primary, secondary, or tertiary strategies. And then again, the order that this list is placed in is not finalized. We'll get feedback from you all later on how these themes will be ordered. So in our final list, the order might be organized a little differently. But there are 11 themes that we have, and each includes 2 to 4 competencies within. So I'm just going to run through all the themes and their definitions, and then we'll spend time looking at all the competencies after that. But the first theme is the public health approach. And with this, we want people to be able to understand and describe how to apply the public health approach to address violence. And then our second theme is ecosystems. And the definition for that is to demonstrate foundational understanding of community violence reduction ecosystems. And then theme 3 is data-driven decision-making. So being able to identify, gather, and apply information sources to support informed planning, implementation, and evaluation of violence reduction efforts. You'll see that we also have examples included under some of the definitions. most of these examples are not meant to be an exhaustive list. We just wanted to provide some parameters and guidance on what we mean with different terms. And then theme 4 is evaluation. So with this, having a foundational understanding of evaluation and how it can be utilized to inform violence reduction programs. And then our 5th theme is communication. So being able to articulate the goals, progress, and impact of community violence reduction efforts to build understanding and support. And then theme 6 is community engagement. And with this, we want people to be able to purposefully collaborate with communities by using relevant approaches that are tailored to their needs, contexts, and priorities. And then theme 7 is collaboration and partnerships. The definition for this is to engage in collaborative efforts with a broad range of multi-sector partners to advance violence reduction. And then theme 8, strategic resource utilization. The definition for this is being able to strategically leverage existing and new resources to effectively inform and deliver violence reduction initiatives. Theme 9, strategic planning. So with this, we want people to be able to advance a variety of strategies that contribute to violence reduction through community and systems level change. And theme 10, ethics. So being able to apply principles throughout all aspects of practice that prevent harm and re-traumatization to communities impacted by violence. And then finally, our last theme is professional development, which encompasses being able to identify professional knowledge gaps and utilize available resources to supplement those needs. So before we jump into the full list, I just wanted to emphasize a few things that we also want everyone to keep in mind as you're reflecting in what feedback to provide. As you'll see, some of the competencies have been framed pretty broadly just to make sure that they're applicable to a variety of roles and sectors, whether those roles are more boots on the ground, community engaged professionals, or those roles are more administrative. The language may feel a little vague or broad, but we just want to make sure that these are applicable to a wide range of professionals in this field. And once we release the competency list, we also don't expect that everyone will automatically have or gain these skills. These competencies aren't meant to teach or train, but just meant to provide direction on the skills and knowledge we want people to gain in order for us to eventually develop a more robust ecosystem. The competencies should ultimately be leveraged to help identify training areas that people may need additional investment in. And then also, just as a reminder, we made changes to our first draft based on the feedback that we got during our listening session. So this draft is a new draft for you all to review. During the session, we had people share likes or dislikes on all the competencies. So as you'll see, I included a star next to every competency in our list that received all likes and no dislikes from everyone in the session, just to give you all an idea of what there was kind of unanimous agreement around. So I'll finish talking in a second. We'll walk through all the themes and I'll collect feedback on all the competencies. But as you review, just please consider these questions that are on the slide because they kind of capture the feedback that we're generally looking to get today. And that's whether the competencies are applicable and relevant across different professional roles in community violence reduction, and whether you can clearly understand the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are being asked for within these competencies. Are there any questions about the core competencies before we move in to the full list? Okay. And feel free to ask questions, of course, throughout. But the first category of competencies I wanted to get feedback on are those under the public health approach. And feel free to share feedback on definitions as well. But the competencies within this are to explain the 4 steps of the public health model to violence prevention and its key components, and then to describe how the key components of the public health model play a critical role in its successful implementation. And then the last competency is knowledge about the risk and protective factors that influence community violence outcomes and how they overlap with other forms of violence. So are there any initial reactions to any of the competencies under this theme? And do these feel applicable and relevant across different roles? Feel free to come off mute or use the chat as well.
So my only comment here is that you've used the words violence prevention here, and you specifically mentioned earlier that
Mhm.
you were trying to sort of use the word violence reduction. So, uh, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
about the inconsistencies there? Thanks.
So that was purposeful and that was something we had talked about because the public health approach to violence prevention is kind of a common, it's not typically called the public health approach to violence reduction. We just wanted to refer to it, to refer to the model as it's typically referred to not confuse people, and to not, yeah, since it's generally known as the public health approach to violence prevention. So that was purposeful and that was something we talked about. Um, but yeah, I guess, does it feel misaligned with how we're referring to violence throughout the rest of the competencies?
That was my thought, but your explanation makes sense as well. I just wonder how other folks will be able to sort of navigate that transition.
Yeah, and we'll supplement all of these competencies with resources and trainings as well after we release the final list. And so I think that's something, and we'll be linking to resources about the public health approach to violence prevention. And with that, I think we can include language about why we chose to use that language instead of violence reduction. But thanks for bringing that up, David. Any other thoughts? Do people generally like these competencies?
I like them with the added context.
Yeah.
That you mentioned.
Yeah, I
Okay,
do
great.
too. I mean, I think they're just really foundational to the work is the focus on, prevention/reduction and thinking about those shared risk and protective factors. So
Mhm.
I actually like the order of having this one first, but of course I'm biased coming from public health, but so 2 thumbs up.
Great, thank you. And one comment that we got during the listening session was that 1.3 didn't feel clear that we were talking about shared risk and protective factors. So we tried to change the language a little bit, but we didn't want to explicitly say shared risk and protective factors just to avoid adding in another term that people have to learn and understand. So I did want to ask whether it's clear with this competency that we mean that we want people to understand those risk and protective factors that are shared with other forms of violence. And I tried to use the term overlap instead, but just wanted to make sure that's clear what we're trying to get across for people. Okay, I see a like or a thumbs up.
It feels clear to me.
Okay, great. If there's no other feedback, I'll move on to the second theme. All right, so theme 2, ecosystems. The first competency for ecosystems is to differentiate between collaboration and coordination when developing partnerships for community violence reduction. Sorry, that box flipped out of the box. And then 2.2 is awareness of the multiple community violence reduction ecosystems that exist in local communities, how they overlap, and where one's role in organization is situated. And then 2.3 is to understand how the state OVP functions within and across local, regional, and state ecosystems. So did these feel applicable and relevant and clearly understandable?
I think so.
I
Yes.
think I might have mentioned this in the listening session, but I'm just wondering if people will understand what ecosystems mean in this context.
Yeah, and we talked about that after the listening session as well. And I think Our goal is that like ecosystems may be understood differently in different contexts. And so we'll provide resources and trainings to link to for people to learn more about that. But our goal is that if people don't understand what the term ecosystems mean when looking at these competencies, they'll hopefully know that that's a gap that needs to be addressed and find those necessary trainings to address that. But we didn't want to provide a definition and kind of, yeah, I guess, get stuck in this box of only that definition and not allowing people the flexibility of other ways that ecosystems are often referred to. Sue Ann, were you going to say something? Okay.
No, I think they look good. But once again, I think just to echo what Beth said, I think the linking in the context, I think, will be huge.
Yeah.
The ecosystem piece.
Great. Any other feedback? Okay. I'll move on to theme 3. So this one is data-driven decision-making. And we have 2 competencies for this. The definition or the examples that we provided are pretty much this. They are the same actually. But 3.1 is being able to effectively locate reliable and trusted information sources to support decision-making. And then 3.2 is being able to effectively assess the relevance, quality, and community fit of information sources to ensure that they meet the needs and priorities of communities served. Any thoughts or feedback about these 2 competencies or the definition?
I think this is Chief Smith from Salisbury PD, and I've got to jump off of here in just a little bit because one of the other core competencies I'm gonna be involved in a community engagement event. Just looking through the whole draft here from a law enforcement perspective, I think this is good so far. Everything that I see, my perspective, because our department we broke down into 3 divisions, and we have a division that has community engagement. We also have a crime center that is data driven and regionally share information, and those are growing more common amongst law enforcement throughout the state where we're sharing information. Community engagement also ties into another core competency in here where we have focused more on communication with the public, engagement with the public, holding public meetings. So just my quick brief that looking over this entire draft for my part is right in line kind of with what my department's core competencies and strategic plan is already set out. So I'm pleased with all of it.
Great. That's really helpful, Chief Smith. Thank you. Yeah, and it's great that you can make connections to the different units of your department. That's what we're hoping that these get at. So I appreciate your feedback on that. And don't worry about having to jump off early. We totally understand. Okay. Any other feedback specifically about the data-driven decision-making competencies? Okay. I will move forward to theme 4 then, which is evaluation. And we have 3 competencies under this. 4.1 is to recognize when and how to incorporate evaluation into programs to assess progress and strengthen program implementation. 4.2 is to identify qualitative and quantitative metrics that effectively measure outcomes and impact of violence reduction initiatives. And then 4.3 is to use evaluation findings to inform ongoing improvements to existing programs and support planning for new violence reduction initiatives. Do all of these feel applicable and relevant across different professional roles and sectors? We tried to get with this kind of the process of like start to finish with evaluation. So knowing what evaluation is, but then also knowing when to incorporate it and how to use findings to strengthen programs.
Kelly, can I comment on the last
Yeah.
theme for theme 3?
Mhm.
I apologize. It was a call from the police department, but
Yeah.
so the data-driven decision making, I wanted to just comment on what's included in here because it is important that CVI organizations or people who are doing CVI also be able to include the data that they collect through their everydayness of operation. And so to see that it would be something relevant kind of puts it back on them to own
Mhm.
some of that research and be confident to start sharing some of that research. I am speaking personally that we should be sharing more of the research that we accumulate through our direct community engagement. So it looks like that's in here, and I was just glad to see that. So just wanted to
Yeah.
make that comment.
Thanks, Kevin. That was feedback that we got during the listening session as well, being able to leverage your own evaluation findings or your own internal research. So we made that change after. All right. Any feedback
Yep.
on the
Yeah, just a comment, a general comment, and I know this is probably just getting into the weeds but I wonder under theme 4 whether the role of evaluation is strongly enough stated here. It says can be utilized. And I guess when I think about evaluation, I think it's critical that it's not optional. It really is. We should not necessarily be thinking about implementing programs where there is not an evaluation piece ahead of time and where the data doesn't support those programs. Now, some may find that controversial, but I just feel strongly that the evaluation piece is critical, and I'm not sure the words can be utilized convey that importance of evaluation. But again, that's maybe just wordsmithing. Thanks.
No, and at this point, we're happy to hear feedback about the wordsmithing piece because I think that'll be our next step internally. And that's really helpful to hear. And we can definitely look at how to make that more direct and more actionable rather than, yeah, just can be. Thank
Just
you.
and just to add to what he said, the programs need to have that. That's a way of support to know that they will be evaluated, right? That's a way of supporting the work that they're doing too.
Mhm. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, that's really helpful. And we'll, yeah, definitely take that and start to wordsmith this definition.
And Kelly, I'm sure that you'll do this here, but I think evaluation is definitely something that folks continue to struggle with. And so adding in any, links or whatnot to resources would be
Yeah.
helpful here as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely try to be for every theme, we'll add in resources or yeah, resources and links to trainings. But I completely agree that the evaluation competencies tend to fall to the back end, I think. So we'll make sure to prioritize that one. Okay. So I'll move on to theme 5. So this theme's communication. 5.1 is to anticipate how communication may impact the broader community and select methods that align with community norms and expectations. 5.2 is develop and deliver tailored messages for different audiences and communication styles to ensure clarity and transparency. And then 5.3 is utilize communication strategies that effectively convey the purpose, goals, and impact of community violence reduction efforts to foster investment and build ecosystem alignment. 5.3 is a brand new competency. This is the only competency in our list that wasn't shared with the listening session folks. But this competency came out of feedback that we got during the listening session, where people felt like the definition to build understanding and support, the support piece felt missing to people. So we created this competency after that, to try and get at how communication can be leveraged to build support and buy-in and investment. So 5.3 is new. If you have specific feedback about that, whether it feels plain language enough or it feels applicable, we would definitely appreciate hearing that. Any thoughts or feedback about the other two competencies? Okay. Does the last one resonate with everyone, 5.3? Okay. I'm seeing some head nods.
Callie, real quick, excuse me. I'm just wondering, when you use the term ecosystem in 5.3, is that kind of the same definition that we were talking about earlier, that you would provide some supplemental information
Yeah.
on?
Yeah, that would be referred to the same as our previous, how we're referring to ecosystems or the definitions we're linking to in the previous theme.
Got it. Thank you. Because sometimes that term is thrown around and people
Yes.
don't have the same understanding
Yeah.
of it.
Okay. No other thoughts on communication? All right. We're like halfway through. Theme 6 is community engagement, and we have 3 competencies under this. So 6.1 is to anticipate how communication may impact the broader community. Oh, I think that one. Wait, sorry. I think that one was accidentally copied over, so ignore the first one. 6.2 is recognize how violence and other historical events have impacted communities and adapt strategies, programs, and services to prevent further harm. And then 6.3 is identify the appropriate entities, organizations, or individuals that should lead specific community violence reduction strategies based on their knowledge, resources, and role in the community. So 6.1 or 6.2 and 6.3 are the competencies for this theme.
I was wondering if 6.2, I know it can cross-cut probably across the different areas. I kind of see that as being part of communication, really kind of thinking about the impact of violence, and it's kind of an interpersonal skill. When I read it, I wasn't entirely sure if that's directly community engagement, but I see it has like the impact of communities and just being aware of that. So yeah, I don't know if that's building upon like the communication piece or not.
Yeah, and I think with this one, or maybe CR just changed 6.1. I think it was this one or 6.1. We had talked about how there was some overlap with the communication theme, but we also we want people to be able to do this when it comes to other areas of programming, whether that's thinking through how to best implement a strategy, how to best conduct evaluation on participants of a program, etc. So kind of, we want people to be able to do these competencies when communicating, but also in other areas of practice, which is why we decided to not include that in communication specifically, if that makes sense.
Got it. And maybe the word recognize is what I'm also toying with of recognize is like identifying it, but how are we expecting people to apply that knowledge? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So maybe being a little bit more direct or actionable with that language rather than just using the term recognize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we see in the like literature, like people can become aware of their implicit bias, but what are they
Yeah.
actually doing to address it? So kind of thinking about that same notion.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you, April. I think that's really helpful. And 6.1 is identify engagement approaches that are appropriate for a community based on culture, age, language, literacy, accessibility, and other local characteristics. That was the one that was missing when I ran through. Any other feedback about these competencies? Okay.
Callie, hey, for some reason I wasn't able to unmute. Yeah, I agree with April about 6.2. I think we definitely need to incorporate something in addition to recognize, because I think that not only do we need to recognize, but we need to ensure that individuals from those impacted communities have opportunity to help shape what those strategies look like in their communities. And if we're talking about community engagement as a way to have a community not only engaged but invested in the strategy, we have to figure out some additional words for that to just put emphasis on that fact.
Yeah, thank you, Letitia. And 6.3 was kind of where we tried to get at being able to identify the appropriate individuals, whether that's community members or members from a certain organization or entity, figuring out who is best positioned to lead violence reduction strategies based on their experiences or their knowledge. But I think we can find ways to make that more clear and also to tie that connection back to 6.2 as well. So that's really helpful to think through how to best connect those two competencies.
I've got another wordsmithing kind of comment here, and that's the use just within the definition, the use of the word purposefully. And I think I understand what you're trying to get at here is that we have to be purposeful, but but I think you could interpret that two different ways. Does that mean that you want to collaborate with purpose, or that you want to purposefully seek out the community to collaborate with? I think those are two different things. And so to me, the word that I've always used and the word that I guess I would like to see here or is intentionality in some kind of way. It really focuses on on your intent to engage the community as opposed to doing so with purpose. So again, I know that's in the weeds and so on, but I think there's some subtle differences there.
No, thank you. And my next word that I was thinking about was also intentionality. So I really like that. And we've looked at these competencies I've looked at them for months. So hearing other feedback about different words is really helpful to think through different ways that we can frame this. So thank you, Dr. Jacobs. And we're also documenting the comments in the chat. I see those as well. All right, just thinking about time, I'm going to move on to theme 7. So collaboration and partnerships. 7.1 is to identify and engage cross-sector partners to align goals, leverage resources, and maximize impact of violence reduction programs, practices, and initiatives. And then 7.2 is to establish partnership structures that define and maintain each organization's role while enabling effective collaboration towards shared goals. Any thoughts or feedback about these two competencies? Do these resonate with everyone? Okay. I will move on to theme 8, strategic resource utilization. So we have 4 competencies under this. The first one is to identify existing community protective factors to strengthen programs and resources. 8.2 is to describe ways that various financial resources can be utilized to support and sustain violence reduction infrastructure programs and services. And then 8.3 is awareness of available local resources and how they can be activated to strengthen programs, services, and initiatives. And then 8.4 is to build intentional relationships with individuals or groups to expand access to essential resources and information needed for violence reduction efforts. Do these feel applicable and relevant and clearly defined? And we added in the definition for financial resources based on feedback from the listening session as well. Before we hadn't clearly defined what we meant by financial resources.
Yeah, I think this looks a lot better. Much improved.
Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. I'll move on to theme 9. We got 3 more and then we're done with looking at the competencies. Theme 9 is strategic planning. 9.1 is to understand the difference between individual, community, and systems level change. 9.2 is to identify key elements needed to move forward violence reduction planning. And then 9.3 is to define measurable goals that guide the implementation of violence reduction strategies.
If I can just go back to 8 for just a second, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. We're going through
Can
this
you
quickly.
can you just help me understand the decision to split or to separate 8.2 from 8.3? Because they both have to do with resources. One looks like it's financial, but
Mhm.
then in 8.3 under local resources, financial is included. And so I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I guess I understand how they're different, but do we really need to separate those two? How are you viewing those two as different?
I think that's a good point. I think we wanted people to, when we were thinking of 8.2, we wanted people to be able to specifically understand how different financial resources could be braided and weaved and utilized to strengthen different areas of violence reduction infrastructure. And I think we were thinking about that a little bit more specifically. Ciara, if you have any additional feedback on that.
Yeah. Just to add to what Callie said, I think we also, our intention behind splitting them up was also to kind of broaden people's like understanding of the term resources, because we felt like when people use the term resources that they typically are thinking financial. And so we were trying to have one, we wanted to go into a little bit more detail about like different types of financial resources, but then also make sure that people think beyond financial resources. So that was the intention behind splitting them. But again, like Callie said, we're open to feedback and thoughts and ways to wordsmith.
I wonder if you just removed the word financial from 8.3, if that would help. If any of that,
Yeah.
if having the word financial in both places,
Yeah. If it feels like they're too similar.
maybe. And my thought with this was that 8.3 may be like the in-kind support of people, or,
Mhm.
you know, somebody showing up with a slide of water to an event.
I think that's helpful. And I can see where including the word financial could seem duplicative and cause some confusion. And I think that's a helpful way of looking at it, Sue Ann. So we can definitely think through changing or removing financial from 8.3, or yeah, replacing it with something along the lines of in kind.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that the overall goal, I think, should be to encourage people to think broadly about what resources mean, whether they're
Mhm.
financial, whether they're human, whether they're administrative, whatever, political. There's a lot of different resources, and so I think the goal should be for us to all think broadly about resources, financial included. And so again, I just wonder whether separating them, um, whether it might be better to just have one statement about resources
Mhm.
that sort of emphasizes that very inclusive definition of what resources are. But again, I don't want to slow this process down. I know we're up against the clock here. Thanks.
No, that's helpful for us to consider, and we'll definitely talk through that. And I can see where yeah, both having both of those can be a little bit repetitive. So this is helpful to get that perspective. All right, just thinking about time, I'm going to move on to theme 9. Oh, I did cover theme 9. Was there any feedback specifically about strategic planning? The competencies under this? Okay. Theme 10, ethics. So 10.1 is to identify and mitigate any potential risks when working in communities, including physical and psychological harm. 10.2 is to apply communication strategies that align with community values, norms, and practices. 10.3, pursue responsible and reciprocal use of community resources. And then 10.4 is to implement violence reduction practices that are tailored to community characteristics. Any thoughts?
Feel like I'm talking way too much here. Um, so is part of your goal to have these strategies overlap? Because 10.2 clearly overlaps with one of the communication strategies and under 5, which is
Mhm.
fine. I think they should reinforce one another, but I just wonder uh, whether it was your intention uh, to have them so closely overlap, or should one refer to the other, or how are you thinking that these interact with one another?
Yeah, and we had talked about that overlap and whether it was too duplicative, but we really wanted to emphasize being able, in the ethics piece, being able to think about being intentional about thinking about what community values, norms, and practices are, and how that can inform how we go about communicating or interacting with communities. So if there's feedback on whether that's too duplicative and where we can make that difference more clear, I'm definitely open to that. But that was our intention to kind of build off of the communication piece in this competency under ethics to really make that emphasis.
No, I think it's fine to to state it in both places, but maybe you refer back to one, or you
Mhm.
link them somehow so people know that that it's also part of a different strategy.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Any other feedback? We got one more. And if anything comes up, I know this has been quick. If anything comes up afterwards, you can always feel free to email me your feedback as well if there's something that you didn't get the chance to share that you think about. So theme 11 is professional development. 10.1 is to participate in continuous learning opportunities to strengthen knowledge, skills, and abilities related to violence prevention. And then 10.2 is to build and maintain connections to professional networks. Any thoughts? Do these feel relevant, or is anything missing? Okay. I see a like or a thumbs up.
I think I'm this is the last one, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to reflect on, and you have it at the bottom here, just thinking about people's like abilities. I'm curious if there should be like a theme around some of the interpersonal skills needed to do this work, or even some of our philosophies. So having a trauma-centered, victim-centered kind of approach to some of this work and working in communities. You had the reflecting on history. Sometimes in like psychology, social work, we talk about like that self-reflective practice and just having a nod to that. So I'm just identifying there's a lot of kind of technical skills here, but
Yeah.
just kind of thinking about the hard skills that come with this work.
Yeah, and that was something we talked a lot about after our advisory board meeting in February. And we decided to not include some of the more technical, like interpersonal skills, because we would assume that those skills are going to be included in people's specific job outlines or job competencies. So we didn't want to duplicate competencies that people most likely already have for their roles. And we wanted these to be made more specific to actual like community violence reduction hard skills that people need. But I think language around like being trauma informed is applicable and could be something that we add if it feels like it's missing and needed in these competencies. But that was kind of our thought process around leaving out those interpersonal type of skills. And we want these competencies to be used in combination with other competencies that people are being asked of that are specific to their roles. Does that make sense? Or do you feel like with that, these competencies would benefit from additional language?
I think so. I think we're making some assumptions and really just kind of thinking about developmentally for folks who are maybe new to some of this work or yeah, I don't know. We identified things like active listening when we met last time and some of those skills. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and I see agreement with that as well. So we can definitely figure out how to best incorporate that throughout these competencies. Thanks, April. Are there any thoughts more broadly, any additional feedback more broadly about all the competencies?
Can I just make a comment about theme 11?
Yeah.
And that is that I wonder whether one of those, and it may be an additional competency might be to actually create the continuous learning opportunities. I mean, we are already doing that. We're having these conferences, et cetera. And so rather than just say participate and build in connections, I think one of our responsibilities should be to create those educational opportunities that people can then access. So
Yeah, or being able to create those learning opportunities for yourself. There are gaps. Thanks. I think that's really helpful.
Comment, but I don't want to make it seem like I want to kind of highlight some of what April was sharing. And I thought she was I was looking for this one word. So in the professional development and in the the professionalism and the trauma informed, like the self-care portion of the people who are doing this work. The trauma, you can only take so much, and you start looking for where to go. And sometimes some of the smaller organizations don't have the ways and means to maybe address it holistically right at the point. But if there's something continually going on, we can say, hey, listen, we understand that you may be going through something, you may take a day off or maybe do something quick, but we have this training coming up or this workshop coming up. Let's make sure we get you signed up for that, so that some of these smaller organizations can be addressing it without having to feel like they're the ones that's doing it. And because it makes a difference when you can forecast what is on the horizon, and it shows that NCOVP is aware and is already making a sort of concession for when these things happen, because they most likely will happen.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, thanks for, April and Kevin, thank you for that feedback. And we'll workshop and figure out how we can best incorporate those thoughts. But I think that's really helpful to hear. Okay, we're almost at time. But again, if there's any additional thoughts that you have, feel free to email me. I want to make sure that we capture everything. And I know we moved through this quickly. I mentioned this earlier, but we also wanted feedback on how the core competencies should be ordered numerically. So we won't have time to really have a discussion on this at all, but if you all could either visit this, I think Paul will drop the link in the chat, or use this QR code. We just wanted to get feedback on how the themes should be ranked, whether there's an order that feels more intuitive and clear for those who are going to be reading it, or if there are themes that should be prioritized at the beginning for greater emphasis. There might be other factors that you consider as you're creating your ranking, and that's fine. We just generally want thoughts on what things people are considering as they're ranking the list and how the list should be ordered. So we'll need to, I'll give you all a chance to open that up. And right now or after the meeting, feel free to create your ranking, and we'll take that into consideration as we're figuring out how to order all of these competencies. When you visit the web page, it should allow you to automatically move each competency or each of the themes into an order. But let me know if you have any questions or issues accessing it. As for next steps, so our team will synthesize all of this feedback that you all shared today. And thank you so much for your engagement and also taking the time to provide such helpful feedback. And we'll make refinements to this second draft and make changes. And then we'll do one last internal review with our team and our DPS team before we release the competencies. And before we officially publicly release the competencies, we'll make sure to share the final version with you all beforehand, since you guys have been so helpful throughout this process of us creating them. And then, like I mentioned earlier, after we release the competencies, we'll start to work through either developing or identifying existing trainings and resources that can supplement the core competencies and help provide the skills and knowledge that we're asking people to gain in this space. All right. Was everyone able to access the ranking, the webpage or the poll? Okay. Thank you so much for all your feedback. Ciara, was there anything else that you wanted to add for next steps or? Okay. So I'll pass it to Desiree to share a little bit more about one of our projects that we've been working on.
Hi everyone. So good to see all of your faces. So we, like Ciara and Kelly said, we've been pretty busy these past couple of months, working on a lot of things related to our strategic plan and implementation activities. So one of those is one-pagers, or one of the projects is a couple one-pagers related to our strategic plan. So a little background on why we're developing these one-pagers. Like I said, it's a part of our ongoing work to advance the priorities outlined in our strategic plan. We're developing, currently 2 are developed, we're working on a 3rd, and they'll help with folks, particularly kind of related to this core competencies discussion, but helping folks who are possibly newer to the field, newer to community violence, and kind of help them understand how to approach community violence through a public health lens. It's also great for practitioners who are experienced, but maybe they want to better integrate the public health approach, a public health lens to their existing work. And also the one-pagers will help strengthen the shared understanding across partners and support consistent messaging. That's something that has frequently come up in meetings both within this group and others. The kind of struggle of different sectors having different languages for different things, but still talking about community violence. And so we wanted to provide some resources to help folks kind of lay the groundwork for having some foundational messaging, but also, providing some kind of training or resourceful tools for folks to learn more about public health. So the one pagers are aligned with two goals from our strategic plan. So goal one, objective two, expanding cross-sector partnerships. And then goal three, objective one, enhancing the understanding and use of the public health approach. And again, a lot of this also aligns with the core competencies that we discussed. So kind of hitting a lot of goals by developing these one pagers. So the first one pager focuses on the public health approach to community violence. The goal of this one pager is to clearly describe the public health approach, why it matters, how we'll apply it to how our office applies it to community violence reduction. And then the second one pager expands on the public health approach, and it kind of dives a little bit more deeper into the second step of the approach, which is identifying risk and protective factors. And then the third one that I mentioned, we're also developing one related to ecosystems, which again goes back to that core competency discussion that we were having about kind of ensuring that there's a tool folks can refer to have a foundational understanding of what an ecosystem is, particularly how our office defines it. So we're developing that one pager. That one's not ready to show yet, but definitely providing that as a supplemental tool as well. So I'm going to walk through the first two, the public health approach and the risk factors one pager with you all. They're still a work in progress, obviously, but they're close to their final form. But I'll walk through those with you all just to kind of give you all a brief overview and give an opportunity for some quick questions and initial thoughts. But we'll also send it to you all after this meeting for you all to actually, dive deeper and look into it, because obviously looking at the screen, you can't, it may take a minute for you to process the information and all of that. So yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for sharing that, Callie, with the first one pager. So this is the public health approach one pager titled Taking a Public Health Approach to Community Violence. And so this document, we kind of introduce, the public health lens, the importance of the public health approach, and why it's important for us to take that approach to community violence. So why it's important to do a systematic approach and looking at individual, community, society level factors that contribute to violence and how that's helpful in reducing harm and guiding evidence-based decision making. And then we kind of go a little bit more deep in more depth about the public health approach. So just talking about how it's a 4-step model, explaining what those models are, or I'm sorry, explaining what those steps are a little more in depth so folks can understand what it is. And then we go down into the key components, which again is also outlined in our core competencies. So outlining those key competency or those core components, so many things. The core components of the public health approach here. And again, because it's a one pager, we try to limit the amount of words because we didn't want it to be too lengthy. Still want it to be, a relatively attractive document that's, easily readable and makes sense, and kind of provides, a short and quick overview of the information. And we've also provided the hyperlinks and things as well for folks to kind of dive deeper if they would like to. But the purpose of this document is really just to provide an overview of what the public health approach is. So yeah, going back to the core components. So we outlined those here. And then we also talk about the levels of prevention. And again, this document is not just talking about the public health approach broadly, but specifically applying it to community violence. So we're within the levels of prevention, we're providing, specific examples that are related to community violence and hyperlinking where we can, example models and strategies of community violence that is, or of like models that are at that level of prevention that are addressing community violence. So very quick overview of that document. And again, we'll send that to you all as well. But the audience for this document, for both documents, is, like I said, professionals, not necessarily the general public, but folks who are within this work, whether they're new or experienced. So one of the things I'll ask whenever we reach out about feedback is just thinking about, the folks that are on your staff, thinking from their lens, like could this be something that would be a document that they could like easily understand, follow? So yeah. I'll pause for any thoughts there. I know that was a quick kind of overview, but is there just any quick initial thoughts based on what I shared? Is there anything that seems like could be missing, or maybe any additional resources that you think could be linked within this document? Um, yeah. Okay. Hearing none. And again, we'll send you all copies of these documents for you all to have more time to process and um, give us feedback. So then we'll go on to the second one pager, which is the risk and protective factors one pager. So like I said, this one highlights the second step of the public health approach, which is identifying risk and protective factors. Again, these one pagers are specifically applying the public health approach to community violence, so providing specific examples related to community violence. Oh, sorry, Beth, did you raise your hand?
Yes. Yes, sorry, I was muted. I thought I was muted. I just was wondering, like, what would be a time frame for giving feedback? Because it's, um, it's hard to give feedback on this much information, kind
Yes.
of, just looking at it, but happy to give feedback once we get the, copies of the documents. But if you
Ye-
could give us a timeline for that, that would be helpful.
Yes, yes, we have a date. It's on one of the slides. I believe it's like 2
Okay.
weeks from now. So yeah,
Okay,
y'all
sorry, I
have
didn't see it on
time.
the slides.
Yes, no, we haven't gotten there yet. You were ahead. But yes, we'll ask for feedback. We'll give you all about 2 weeks or so to sit and think. So yeah, I know within this specific forum you need time to kind of process. But yes, thank you for raising that, Beth. So yes, with this with this one pager, the risk and protective factors one pager, we're talking about the second step of the public health approach, and so it really just provides kind of an introduction. We'll be linking the first public health approach document. So if this is shared like via website or something like that, folks will be able to link to the other public health approach one pager. And Kelly, if you could scroll down a little bit, we have a grid here, and this is a grid of the kind of social ecological model and then applying it to community violence. So applying the risk and protective factors to those various models, or various levels. So that way folks can understand kind of how those risk and protective factors are applied to those different levels. So the individual level, what are some risk factors that exist there? What are some protective factors that exist there? And so on and so forth. So really, the goal here is to help folks like practitioners kind of understand where they could possibly target or focus their prevention and reduction strategies. Um, and again, this list isn't exhaustive. This is just kind of based on some general research, but just kind of want to give folks a guide on like how they can identify risk and protective factors and use that to apply, create, adapt reduction strategies within their communities. And then the second page of this document, if you could scroll down, Callie, it includes key considerations and some tips. So really just key considerations for folks when they are looking to identify those risk and protective factors, what to consider, including like considering, the assets that are within their community that exist already, other ways that they can invest in their community and apply those risk and protective factors, what data and what sources to look to or look at, what data repositories to look at to gather that information. And then there's also some tips for measuring change within those factors. So we provided some links on, kind of foundational knowledge on evaluation for understanding how we can, once we've decided we're going to address a certain risk and protective factor, how do we actually effectively measure that change in behavior or something like that for the program. So yeah, that's just the gist of that one pager. Any questions or initial thoughts? Okay, hearing none. Thank you all so much. And then for next steps, like I said, we'll be sending you all draft copies of these. Obviously, again, they're close to their final form, but not just yet. So we do want to get that specific feedback. And I'll provide some specific questions and like guiding questions to get specific feedback from you all on the content and kind of layout of each of these one-pagers. And yes, we will ask for your feedback by June 3rd. So yeah, about 2 weeks to get that feedback in so that we can publish them and share them with the world. That's it. Okay, I will pass it to Ciara to talk about new business.
Thanks, Desiree. And thank you both, and thanks to everybody for providing them with feedback on the core competencies and the feedback to come on the one-pagers. Next on the agenda, we want to just open it up for you all. If you have any updates, announcements, things you want to share with the group, this is that time, and we've got a good amount of time. So feel free to just unmute and share anything you have for the group. Okay. I don't hear any unmutes, but I want to give another few seconds or so in case folks are trying to get unmuted or trying to gather things that they want to share. Okay. Well, that's all right. We will move forward, and as I'm sharing this update, if anything comes up for folks, feel free after this. You can unmute as well if something has come to mind. But We did want to take a moment to share the date for our next webinar. So that webinar will be held on June 24th. And we're in the process of finalizing the topic and then subsequent speaker or speakers. But we wanted to take a moment to kind of share some of the topic ideas that have come up based on past evaluation feedback and other comments from folks over the past few months. These are some topics listed on the screen that have come up as of interest. And we wanted to take a moment to share these with y'all and get any thoughts about the topics and also about potential speakers on these topics. So right now, the 4 topics are community mobilization and advocacy, community responses in the wake of violence, the role of faith-based organizations in violence reduction, and utilizing public data sources. So you can feel free to unmute or put in the chat or follow up with us afterwards. But if you have any speaker suggestions or thoughts on these topics, something within these topics that you think is particularly important to emphasize, please let us know. And that will help us to help us narrow down on which topic to prioritize for this webinar, and then also how to prioritize for future webinars as well. And thank you, April. I see your comment in the chat. That is helpful. Okay, I see some things coming in the chat.
Ciara, I dropped a name, Matt DiMatteo. He pastors a church in Chicago, but they started their 501c3 and they oversee, if not majority, of the CVI work and community engagement work in Little Village. But he is someone who I would identify as a leader in how do you bring in faith-based work, but also provide community services, et cetera, in this space. Very, very well informed and knowledgeable. So someone I just would be key on that.
Awesome. That's really helpful, John. Thank you so much.
I just have a question, and that is when you talk about community mobilization and when you talk about community responses, are you talking about the communities that themselves are impacted by violence? Are you talking about the broader community or both?
So I would say a little of both. I think so. These are our way of kind of summarizing a few different kind of ideas or thoughts that have been shared with our office of what people want to hear from. But I would say it's a mix of both of how like communities that are impacted by violence, respond and kind of mobilize after that to kind of change that trajectory, but then also how to bring in the larger community to support those efforts as well.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think most of us, when we see that word, at least I do, I can't speak for anybody else, think about the communities themselves that are impacted by violence. But I think one area where certainly we continue to struggle is engaging the broader community around violence reduction when many of those are neighborhoods, areas that are not themselves impacted, and so they don't see that this is their problem. And so
Mhm.
how do we engage the broader community around violence reduction when they're not necessarily personally impacted? So I think that distinction is important to make things.
Thank you. And that is definitely a helpful distinction. We'll add that to our notes when thinking about framing for those topics. Okay, I see we've got more comments in the chat, but does anybody else, before we move forward, have anything they want to share verbally? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for the thoughts and recommendations that you have shared. And if other ideas come to mind, please feel free to reach out to our team. In our follow-up email, we'll include this as well for you all to remember the topics and continue to stew on. Well, we've gotten through all of our content, which is amazing. And we did it in record time. We might actually get out a little early today. So as we move to wrap up, we just want to remind y'all of some next steps and things to continue to look out for. So as a reminder, our next meeting will no longer be in July. It's going to be in August, on August 26th at our same time, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And it'll be virtually again. And I believe I mentioned this during our in-person meeting in February, but we only scheduled one in-person meeting, so far. But if y'all are interested in having more in-person meetings, you can let us know and we're happy to accommodate that. We didn't want to, have them all in person and make it too big of a commitment, but we know that sometimes people really value those opportunities to connect and convene in person. So if we get kind of an overwhelming request for that, we'll definitely do what we can to try to make another in-person happen. But for right now, this next meeting will be on WebEx. And as I mentioned earlier, registration for the East and the West region meetings are still open and will be open until June 5th. So please register, please share with your networks, and feel free to point anybody that has questions our way, and we're happy to help. Block your calendars for the conference, again, November 17th and 18th. We will be sending out more information about that over the next couple of months, and registration will open in August. But in the meantime, we have the request for speakers that is open and will close in June. So if you're interested in being a speaker, please submit a proposal, and then please share these with your networks as well. And we are also have an open call for sponsors for the conference. We will be sending out that the one-pagers that Desiree shared and requesting feedback by June 3rd. So in our follow-up email, those will be sent out. And again, thank you in advance for your support with that. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, if you all have events and activities going on throughout the month of June, or throughout the summertime related to Gun Violence Awareness Month, or specifically related to amplifying your community violence prevention and intervention work during the summer months, please share with us and via email to anybody on our team. And
Yeah.
with that, I'll open. Oh, did somebody unmute?
I did, Ciara. I'm sorry. For Greensboro next week, it's not in my, I don't know why it's not in my calendar. So if we did not register, is that like a don't come or?
Yes. It kind of is, because we're at capacity for that meeting, but just message us, send a message to Desiree, Kevin, and we can specifically talk more with you about that. But for just general reference, please don't send any links out to anybody else for the Middle Region meeting, because that registration is closed and we're at capacity. But for the East and for the West, those are still open. Any other questions about any of the updates or reminders or anything else? Okay. Well, hearing none, we will be able to wrap up about 16 minutes early. As always, it's really great to be with you all in community and to have your support with activities that our office is doing. And we're looking forward to seeing you, some of you next week, and then for others, we'll see you throughout the summer. But we'll talk to you all soon.